Good evening from New York City. This is the Ingraham Angle. I'm Pete Hegseth in for Laura tonight. A lot of major news developments going on right now, including new details about intense, institutional, intentional pressure applied by the FBI at the highest levels to investigate the Trump campaign. New details, we're going to bring them to you. Plus, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, they're getting scorched from the left over the Trump-Maxine Waters feud. But what you're not going to believe is why. And a big trade war between the U.S. and China is officially underway, or at least the first shots. They've been lobbied. But President Trump may have already won the first battle. We're going to explain that later in the program. But first, the White House doubling down in its support of ICE. Calls to abolish the agency, they're spreading like wildfire, as you know, throughout the left. And earlier today, Vice President Mike Pence became the latest administration official. When the number two comes to the defense, you know they're bringing the big guns to draw a line in the sand against the onslaught. Listen.
While I stand before you today at a time when some people are actually calling for the abolition of ICE, in this White House, let me be clear, we are with you 100%. The American people have every right to engage in peaceful protest. But these threats against ICE officers and their families must stop, and they must stop now. Under President Donald Trump, we will never
Mike Pence in the last year and a half, starting a hashtag, I stand with ICE. Well, abolish ICE supporters are praying to make this a wedge issue as the midterm elections approach. But is it going to blow up in their faces, or might it work? Joining us now with reaction is Fox News contributor Rachel Campos Duffy, along with immigration attorney Francisco Hernandez and Democratic pollster and Fox News contributor Doug Schoen. Doug, you've got the home court advantage this evening here in studio, so go to you first. You say it's not a set issue that abolish ICE is good for Democrats, and that there's not much consensus here on that.
Well, I think it's a bad issue. I think it's well outside the mainstream of what the American people want. They want border enforcement. Many want a wall. The number who want open borders or to relax scrutiny of those coming in at a time of terror and illegal immigrants coming from Central America is very small. I think it's the far left and the Democratic Party hijacking effectively the mainstream narrative to the ultimate detriment, I believe, of the party if this carries on.
Interesting. Rachel, to you, there was a poll that came out from Reuters, and we're going to put it up on our screen, that showed that the most important issue currently for registered voters is immigration at 15%. Not a majority, just a plurality. Well, that's a different poll, but we'll roll with this one anyway. Look at this. Here we go. Here's the poll we want, 15%. However, for Democrats, it's only 7%. It's their highest issue. So it appears, and for Republicans, 26% of Republicans believe that it's the most important issue. So a lot of intensity on the Republican side, less so on the Democratic side. It almost feels like the far extreme of the Democrat Party is driving this abolish ICE narrative, and potentially in a really bad direction.
Abolishing ICE is well outside the mainstream, but the Democrat Party is well outside the mainstream. I live in Middle America. I'll tell you what concerns people about the border and about what's coming across the border. It's really about drugs. I mean, Pete, you're from the Midwest. Yep. You know where these forgotten communities are that are finally coming back thanks to the Trump economy, but they're still suffering because of so much drugs that are devastating our communities, devastating families. Vast majority of that's coming over the southern border. That's important to them. Let me just say 127,000 undocumented criminals were arrested by ICE last year. Almost 2,000 of those were homicides. 78,000 of those arrests were for drugs. So again, abolish ICE. What happens to those 127,000 criminal illegal immigrants?
No, it's a great point, Francisco. Yet, if you were to watch the so-called mainstream media, this was going to be Trump's Katrina. This was the zero tolerance policy at the border was going to tank his numbers. I'm going to put the poll up that we showed briefly earlier. It was the wrong one at first, but now we'll get it right. Trump's approval rating amongst Hispanics since that policy has been in place has increased by 10%, counterintuitive to coastal elites. But to Hispanics that came here legally, it's offensive to think that immigration is the only issue that matters to them. Their economy is improved, their lives are improving, and they think laws ought to matter. Does that surprise you at all that the numbers have gone up so much?
Well, why? The numbers don't matter anything. Let's keep our eye on the ball. The president and Congress have done zero. Zero on immigration, which was promised. It was sworn to in blood
you're saying,
that it would
hold
be
on,
addressed.
Francisco, you're saying the president has done nothing, yet the entire left wing has premised its resistance on the Trump administration doing everything, doing too much with ICE, doing too much at the border.
They haven't even gotten a single dollar to put the first brick on the border wall.
Well, that's not true.
I mean, come on, guys. They've done zero.
And wasn't there
everything
an
that's
allocation
going
in the
on
budget?
now?
Hold on, Francisco. There was an allocation in the budget. I mean, it wasn't as much as Trump supporters would want, but $1.6 billion is not chump change.
It was for repairs for the stuff that fell
Thank goodness.
when we tried to build it in 2001. Okay, guys, we still can't even buy the property for a wall. What happened with Congress acting? What happened with the Dreamers? What happened with the immigration reform? What happened? We're going to fix this. We're in a labor shortage in this country, the worst labor shortage we've had in the last 100 years for sure. And we can't pass immigration reform. Congress is sitting there. Now we're blaming ICE. Do you guys realize how irresponsible it is to blame
those are very
ICE?
different
Their
issues.
agents, their lives are in danger.
That's different issues.
Francisco, thank you for saying that. Thank you for saying that, because ICE has become sort of the catch-all
so what we turn it
for
on
resistance to this
Congress,
administration.
get off your ICE is only doing what Congress told it to do.
Conflation everywhere. Doug, to your point, has the president ever had a willing partner on getting anything seriously done on immigration?
They have a majority.
Francisco, can you let someone else talk other than you? Look, I'm all for immigration reform, and I'm also for civility. And to have civility requires negotiation. You can do the wall, you can do the Dreamers, but you need compromise to do it. Francisco is right to the extent that there is nothing going on in Congress, but really, your point's exactly right, Pete. If ICE becomes the issue, Francisco, you got to give people a break.
We'll get back to you. Let Doug speak.
But if ICE becomes the proxy for immigration, A, the Democrats hurt themselves, B, there's no immigration reform, and ultimately the party could be marginalized in the midterms and going forward to 2020.
Rachel, can the Democrats overcome identity politics to be serious on this issue?
No, I mean, Pete, you brought this up at the beginning of the segment. You said, the vice president speaking so strongly. There's a reason why the vice president is doubling down on what the president said earlier. His speech this week, he said, the Democrat Party wants anarchy. That is absolutely true. This is where the Democrat Party are. They are the party of socialists. They are the party of anarchy. And we have never had a president, a leader of the Republican Party with the I don't want to use the word, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
The gumption to say the truth. And it's resonating. People love law enforcement. People want rule of law, including Hispanics, which is why that poll that you mentioned earlier, up by 10%. If you live in Central America, you know exactly what happens when there is no rule of law. You know exactly what happens when you have a government that can't control its borders and can't control corruption. So, yes, this is a winning issue for the president. That is why he's doubling down on it. That is why the vice president's doubling down on it. And the Democrats are fools to go with this abolish ICE message.
Francisco, you've been chomping at the bit. Where do you want to start?
I've been chomping at the bit. We need the president to lead the Republican majority in Congress to pass some immigration reform. Did we forget the Republicans are majority in both the House and the Senate? And they're both afraid of the Democratic filibuster. Let them filibuster. Let them show the other side of that coin. Let them show the double face.
What's the other side of the coin, Francisco? What's the other side of the coin they're going to show? Is it open borders? Is it amnesty without reciprocation of a wall? They don't want a wall. They don't want merit-based immigration.
1 year. Single employment permits, renewable year to year. Make them sure they're paying that taxes. They're not committing crimes. They are fully employed and paying taxes and off of welfare. Year to year renewable cards, work permits.
Year to year
there's no job, they don't get to stay.
I'm for that. I'm for immigration reform, and I'm a Democrat. I'm not an anarchist. There is a civil wing of the Democratic Party that's rational.
Where are
Doug
you,
Jones,
other than you, Doug?
Yeah,
I'm right here.
Rachel,
I'm with you tonight.
The question a host should ask: where's the leadership on this?
Well,
with
that's the problem.
Approach.
We don't have vocal leadership.
That's right.
Connor Lamb won a congressional race. Doug Jones won in Alabama. There are centrist, but it's sadly the case we don't have leadership to compromise, to do what Francisco wants to do, which is to get comprehensive immigration reform, get the border done, get guest workers, and get a pathway to citizenship
but you
for
don't
the
need
dreamers.
compromise. You have a majority. Republicans have a majority. You don't need compromise.
Of course you need.
We're a
Francisco,
country.
That's a
We're
straw
one
man
nation.
argument. That's a straw man argument. You know you need to beat a filibuster in the Senate, so ultimately you need something
That's
that
right.
Democrats would ever vote for, and they're not going to. Rachel, give us the last word on this.
I would just say thanks to the very radical turn and the freedom that they have now to expose themselves as the radicals they are on the Democrat side. I think we may finally get that majority we need in the Senate during this midterm. I don't think this is going to be a blue wave at all. I think these kinds of positions that the Democrats are taking are going to lead us to get the majority we need to pass the 4 pillars that Donald Trump wants to
Rachel,
solve immigration,
I think you're right. In a common sense America where there's still enough common sense amongst the electorate, if the issue is immigration, if the economy is going well, and then the other issue is immigration, you've got I stand with ICE versus abolish ICE. I want borders versus open borders. I just feel like that cuts in the president's direction. But all of you, thank you very much.
Republicans are behind by about 9 points in recent polls. The Democrats have a chance if and only if it's a big if.
They were behind
centrists like me
when
emerge.
President Trump won.
All those Doug Schoen centrists.
Absolutely.
Show up at
Come
the
join me.
Election day.
Come join me.
A lot of them are becoming Republicans.
Yes, a lot of them are becoming Republicans. Great point, Rachel. Thank you all very much for your time tonight. We appreciate it. Fiery debate. Well, coming up next, newly released memos. They're raising new questions about major FBI pressure, institutional pressure, intentional pressure to investigate the Trump campaign. The new details you're not going to want to miss coming up next.
At Visiting Angels.
Welcome back. We're just getting warmed up, so stick with us. New light is being cast on the FBI's efforts to investigate the Trump campaign. John Solomon's latest piece in the Hill newspaper details internal bureau memos about the pressure applied to Justice Department investigators and their effort to get a warrant on former Trump campaign advisor Carter Page. An email exchange between infamous FBI agent Peter Strzok and his lover Lisa Page from October 14th of 2016, just a few weeks before the election, shows their desire to create talking points for then FBI Deputy Director Andy McCabe to help secure that warrant. One email from Strzok reads, in part, and I quote, "At minimum, that keeps the hurry the F up pressure on McCabe." And believe it or not, that is just the tip of the iceberg. Joining us now with reaction is Tom Fitton, the president of Judicial Watch. Tom, thanks for joining us this morning. We buried the lead on this one. I'm going to put another quote up from Peter Strzok. This is from September 26th of 2016. He said, and as a pretext, he said this, and I quote, "At a minimum, the letter that Carter Page wrote provides us a pretext to interview him." Pretext is code for an excuse to interview Carter Page. How explosive is all this?
Oh, it's further confirmation that the Trump-Russia investigation was infected by this hyper-political bias against President Trump, where they're looking for excuses to target his team. You had Page write a letter complaining about an improper FBI leak, and the response from one of the top FBI officials, well, let's use this as an excuse to bring him in and interview him. And then they follow that up with the infamous FISA warrants, which were supported, which would never have been approved but for their reliance on the Clinton DNC dossier. And then another aspect of this, which is also in Solomon's piece, is that right after the election, they are talking about the day after the election, President Trump's elected, they focus on, well, we have to get all the people tied to Paul Manafort and compare notes and figure out what we're going to do there. Well, so Paul Manafort is being targeted not because of anything he did wrong, but the trigger is President Trump's election. Paul Manafort, by the way, right now is in solitary confinement.
Yes.
You know, President Trump should really think about ordering his Justice Department to at least shut this Mueller investigation down or pause it, given all the corruption in its formation in the FBI in 2016.
You're referring to an email from Strzok to Page where they said we need all of their names to scrub and we should give them ours for the same purposes. Scrubbing after the election, never a good look. Carter Page was actually on this network a couple of hours ago on Tucker's program speaking for himself. Listen to what Carter Page said.
Do you expect that you're going to be charged with anything after all of this? Tucker, I couldn't even imagine anything that I could potentially be charged with. It's just, particularly after seeing John Solomon's article today, it just becomes, the whole, using the term from that quote you had, pretext. The pretext was absolutely outrageous, ridiculous.
So they found a pretext. Then they surveilled the guy for a year. That sounds like a guy that seems pretty confident they didn't find anything. Was this indeed the witch hunt the president accuses?
Carter Page was a cooperating informant with the FBI, and Strzok knew that. That's why they used the phrase pretext. And the spying on Carter Page was a convenient vehicle to get at the Trump operation. And who knows what other FISA warrants and applications were corruptly sent over to the court as well. Carter Page isn't going to be prosecuted. There is no Russia collusion, and the only collusion that we're aware of with respect to Russia is Hillary Clinton using Fusion GPS to gather Russia intelligence to smear Donald Trump. Mueller ought to be investigating how his investigation started if he's looking for Russia collusion.
Tom, help us for a second, though. According to the most recent statement of expenditures, Mueller's operation is ramping up. What does that say to you?
Oh, well, there are no controls over Mueller, practically speaking. Not only does he have all of these other lawyers he's hired, all of which are registered Democrats, no registered Republicans, he's actually going into the Justice Department and, as needed, using other resources informally. So that budget is just a pretend number because the Justice Department's at Mueller's beck and call, an out-of-control investigation that is really abusive in its targeting and of not only President Trump, but people around him.
Wow, I don't know about you, but I love pretend numbers. They're my favorite. Tom Fitton, thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Hey, you're welcome, Peter.
You got it. Well, and joining us now with reaction from the other side is Julian Epstein, a Democratic strategist and former counsel on the House Judiciary Committee. Julian, thanks for joining us. So you've been on the House Judiciary, you've been on these committees that seek documents.
Yeah, both of them.
Let's say this was the inverse. Let's say this was a Democratic now president who was a candidate spied on by an agency controlled by bias toward Republicans. Wouldn't you want committees fighting for every document that they can get? And now these committees are showing us that the bias we saw in the text messages could have just been fun, but now they've been institutionalized into pretext, into pressure, into hurry the F up. Does this not take private exchanges and turn them into institutional bias?
No, look, I've been the staff director and chief counsel for both of these committees, and what I would tell the committee chair if I were serving there was, let's look at the big picture here, and allow me just to give you some context. The Republican-chaired Senate Intelligence Committee this week came out and said, yes, the Russians interfered in the 2016 election to help Donald Trump. The evidence is overwhelming. So the idea that this is a biased investigation...
But that's not collusion. I mean, we know about Russian interference.
You didn't interfere with Tom. Let me just finish.
Go ahead.
So that there may or may not be collusion. We know there was interference, so the idea that we shouldn't be investigating this or that's somehow legitimate is just false. That's one. Two, in terms of the collusion question, we know that Donald Trump Jr., we know that Paul Manafort, we know that others, Kushner, met with people who they believe to be representatives of the Russian government who were giving dirt on the Clintons. So whether there was a violation of criminal law, we don't know, but there certainly is some smoke there.
Julian,
there have been 19, let me just finish again for a second. There have been 19 indictments of individuals, 3 by Trump, 3 indictments of Trump campaign officials. 5 guilty pleas. The idea that this is some kind of bogus investigation is just ridiculous. And the IG said on the Peter Strzok, to get to your question, yeah, Peter Strzok may have been a bad actor, but Strzok did not influence any of the major decisions at the FBI.
So you just did a masterful job of rattling off every single left-wing talking point as it pertains to this investigation. No, you did a nice job. And then you said Peter Strzok's just this small guy over here. No, Peter Strzok was in charge of the Hillary Clinton email investigation. Peter Strzok was in charge of the Trump investigation. Well, no, he was the agent in charge. He was the agent in charge.
He was the lead investigator. Let's get the facts straight.
I'm sorry. Okay.
He was the lead investigator. James Comey was the head.
Lead investigator. I'm happy to use whatever term you'd like to use. He was dismissed from the Mueller probe for his anti-Trump bias. Yet now we learn he wanted to stop Trump. He wanted to find a pretext. How can you sit there as someone who had wanted to get the facts from these committees before and say, this isn't relevant? And by the way, we wouldn't know this information if not for committees and the IG unearthing it. Of course, if Hillary Clinton won, we would never know. I just don't understand why you can't admit at one moment that sometimes this looks really bad for the institution of the FBI and what they were doing politically.
So I think Peter Strzok was a bad actor and he shouldn't have been there to begin with, but I would refer you back to the IG, which this network has touted repeatedly. And the Inspector General said, yes, he was a bad actor, but he did not influence the final decisions of the FBI, which was not to charge. Look, let me put it to you this way. The FBI, nobody in their right minds, no Republican consultant thinks the FBI helped Hillary Clinton and hurt Donald Trump. On the contrary, the FBI hurt Hillary Clinton by putting the information out
if they did.
No, it wasn't accidental. James Comey put out a week.
They said they believe she would be the next president of the United States, and if we do anything to make sure, we need to make her look better.
You don't interrupt Tom. You don't interrupt.
Well,
allow me to finish. Oh, so you don't want to hear the facts? You just said inadvertently.
I read your information for this segment, and you said a lot of this was debunked by the IG.
Excuse me.
The IG covered the Hillary Clinton server issue. This new information covers the Trump investigations. The IG hasn't exonerated Peter Strzok on the Trump investigation.
Let's just go and roll back the tape. You just said inadvertently. You're factually wrong about that. James Comey came out the week before the election and said he was reopening the investigation into Hillary.
No.
Well,
he didn't want her to look discredited on election night.
Whoa, wait a second. There's no question that hurt Hillary. The FBI did not talk about
intent.
The FBI did not talk about the Donald Trump investigation before the election. So if there was any bias, it was an anti-Hillary bias before the election.
Because they didn't think he was going to win. And they thought she was going to.
Whatever you may think, but to your thesis,
well, those
your
are
thesis
actually
is
facts.
Wait a second. Your thesis is that the FBI was trying to hurt Donald Trump and help Hillary Clinton.
Wait, I don't know how you read "Stop Trump" in text messages. Let's find a pretext.
Let's go back and try and stick to the facts here.
Hurry the F up to put pressure on him. I don't understand if those aren't plain English in front of you that there was bias. I don't know what is. And you should be applauding the Hill for pressing these institutions to actually get information the public would otherwise not know.
We can be repetitive as much as you want to be. And let me say it again. Peter Strzok had no business being inside the FBI and was the wrong guy to be inside the FBI. But the Inspector General said, there were probably 200 investigators working on this investigation.
Only one guy in charge, though.
Okay, of which he was one, right? So Peter Strzok went around and got and organized a conspiracy with 200 other FBI investigators. That is such a silly conspiracy.
But this is an investigation handled at HQ.
Theory.
You know all this.
No.
Of course, I'm not indicting all the investigators.
Excuse me. This is an investigation that was headed by a Republican head of the FBI, and the actions that he took before the election hurt Hillary Clinton and helped Donald Trump.
Wow, did Strzok have any business? But this is some great spin. James Comey actually wanted to take down Hillary Clinton and support Donald Trump. That's a doozy if I've ever heard it. And you came out starting to talk about facts.
Okay.
I appreciate that.
Find me a Republican consultant that will say that James Comey's actions before the election helped Hillary Clinton.
You're talking about
and hurt
intent.
Donald Trump.
I'm not talking about whether or not it helped or hurt.
No,
you
I'm
said
talking about
the
impact.
You're
putting words in my mouth. I never said that. I said it. The FBI hurt Hillary Clinton and helped Donald Trump before the election.
After being called out, you've hedged, which I appreciate.
I pointed out to you that while Strzok may have been wrong, the fact that you have 19 indictments, including indictments of Trump.
If this were the other way around, you'd be saying Peter Strzok was in charge of the investigation. Now he's just one guy of 200, just one little guy down here in HQ, and he wasn't really doing much.
Let me repeat it to you again. As somebody who's had experience with the FBI, James Comey, Republican, was in charge of the FBI
I don't
investigation.
think he would own that label.
And Mueller's indictments, the fact Cohen now seems to be ready to flip on Trump, everything else seems to be quite validating the seriousness of the investigation.
We'll see. I feel like if they hadn't even at this point, it would have leaked to the
read the Republican Intelligence Committee report.
The New York Times. We'll see.
Read the Republican Intelligence Committee.
We have. No, I appreciate it. Julian, thank you for your time. We got to move on. The left mounts a jaw-dropping new defense of Maxine Waters' in her feud with President Trump. And you won't believe who they're throwing under the bus. We're back with that in a moment. President Trump's feud Maxine Waters. A letter signed by about 200 black female leaders and allies, meaning men, blasts Pelosi and Schumer for distancing themselves from the Congresswoman after she advocated the harassment of Trump officials. Their letter reads in part, and I quote, "Disparaging or failing to support Congresswoman Waters is an affront to her and black women across the country and telegraphs a message that the Democratic Party can ill afford, that it does not respect black women's leadership and political power and discounts the impact of black women and millennial voters. Not clear what millennial voters have to do with this, but maybe we'll get to that. Have they not heard a single thing Congresswoman Waters has said recently? Joining us now with reaction, radio talk show host and Fox News contributor Kevin Jackson, along with Erica Thomas, a Democratic state representative for the state of Georgia. Thank you both for joining us. Kevin, I'm going to start with you. Maxine Waters has said in Peach 45, she's talked about harassing Trump supporters. She said, shoot straight, be careful, the wounded animal. Yet we can't criticize her. And these leaders say that she hasn't been defended sufficiently. What do you make of this?
I say, what a great time to be a conservative in America, Pete, to watch the Democrats finally eat their own, and it's in public view. Look, Maxine Waters has been one of the most incendiary people on the Democrat side. She's now firmly representative of the left, and I can see why Schumer and Pelosi would distance themselves from her, because she is strange beyond definition. And, you know, look, she's reaping what she sowed over the years. So her wanting to impeach President Trump, who's done an amazing job for blacks, while watching those numbers drop. And that's what Pelosi and Schumer have watched. They've watched the black population slowly shift towards the Republicans. They've watched this walk-away movement from the Democrats take form. They've watched Hispanics. We've seen the latest polls on them. They're for Trump. The millennials are for Trump. Women are for Trump. And the reason is very simple. Trump has performed. And looking at his record in comparison to Barack Obama, and Maxine Waters is living on the muscle memory of that, you're seeing the outcome.
Erica, so obviously President Trump has taken on Maxine Waters. Maxine Waters has also said some very incendiary things about him and Trump supporters. Why does a letter like this have to focus on discounting the impact of black women, that this is an affront on black women, whether she was black or white or Hispanic? The things she says about this president are worthy of fair critique. So why does this letter go straight to identity politics?
You know, thank you for that. But first, I want to go back to what Kevin Jackson said and how, you know, there's polls out there saying that Hispanics are now more for Republicans and how black women are now more for Republicans. I'd like to see where those polls are coming from. That's not what I said. Because I don't know any Hispanics that I could talk to right now that are more for Trump and that are shifting towards Republicans in this state.
It's not who you've talked to.
I would love for you to tell me where the facts are, because I don't like fake news at all.
Support for the president amongst Hispanics has increased 10% over the last month. That's a fact from a poll, a Harris poll. But carry on. I asked you a question about identity politics. Why is this about her gender and her race, as opposed to the calling out harassment of Trump supporters, which has nothing to do with race?
So I want to say I am not saying that inciting harassment to any person is what we need to be doing. Not at all. We need to be denouncing harassment. Every time I'm on Fox News, I have so many different people that do not like my difference in opinion, that are always on my Facebook, my Instagram, saying things that are threatening me. But I let them have their free speech, because that is the #1 amendment. I let them have their free speech because they are entitled to that. But I will never say at any point, you can't have your free speech because I don't agree with what you're saying. And at the end of the day, we have to make sure that we let people have their free speech.
Well, Erica, so Chuck Schumer answer the question. I'm happy to answer the question, P, because she won't.
Yes.
The reason why they played the race card is because that's all they've got. Maxine Waters and the congressional black, I call them the congressional black circus clowns, are driving blacks and other Democrats from the party because of the things that they're doing. That Maxine Waters essentially put a target on all of the Trump administration employees and said it's okay to go after these people because their opinions differ. That's the crux of this whole thing. Maxine Waters and the left don't want our opinions to be heard, and the only way they can get any traction
is to say, Kevin, are you calling black people clowns? Because I just heard you say that black people are clowns. That's what I heard you say. Please clarify.
No, he's talking about the caucus. He's talking about the caucus.
Please tell me who is a clown. I would love for you to know who is a clown in this. And tell me how the Republican Party has helped you as a black man.
Do you think Maxine Waters is a good representative for the modern Democratic Party? Does she help your side?
So what I would like to say is that Congresswoman Maxine Waters has her opinion and she has her freedom of speech.
Of course.
And I do not believe that Chuck Schumer, Senator Chuck Schumer, I will tell him, I will say what his name is he should not be on the Senate floor denouncing his own party member.
He called her
Now,
un-American. He said what she
that
said was
that
un-American.
Was right.
He's got
said
free
what-
speech
That
rights
was not
as well,
right in
Pete.
any way.
But you're okay
Pete,
with him
Chuck
saying it,
Schumer's
but
got-
he said what she said,
Just
Erica,
like I
was
don't think Kevin
un-American.
Jackson should be calling black people clowns at the
Listen,
same,
Chuck
in the
Schumer
same
said
right.
Chuck Schumer said what many Americans in this country think, and he said his opinion as well, that Chuck Schumer has no obligation to take up for Maxine Waters when she essentially puts a target on the backs of the Trump administration and any other conservative in this country. And I repeat, Maxine Waters and the Congressional Black Caucus are nothing but a bunch of circus clowns, and it's time that people start calling them out. And blacks in America that have been
tell
formerly
me,
Democrats
Kevin
are
Jackson,
leaving the
you're a black
party for
man.
that reason.
You're a black man, so tell me who's representing you in Congress. That's black.
I don't need people representing me in Congress about being
my
black.
question to you, Erica, is why does skin color have to represent representation?
Exactly.
I have Tim Scott's a black man from South Carolina who I think represents my interests very well, just like white men and black women. And why is that the definitive characteristic of the left?
That's all they have.
No, I'm asking him. Since you want to call people out of their names
as a human
and say that
being.
black people
I'm
are
represented
clowns,
as a human
I would
being.
love to know how you are being represented in Congress. How are you being represented, Kevin? Because I will not sit here on this television show and let you call black people clowns. I won't have it.
That's an oversimplification, but we're going to have to leave it right there. Thank you both for your time tonight. We appreciate it. Well, it's being called the biggest trade war in economic history. Not sure who said that, but they must know what they're talking about. And it's now underway between the U.S. and China. Is President Trump, is he already winning it? We're going to explain that coming up next.
Hi, I'm Dana Lash from The Dana Show.
Welcome back. Well, the trade war between the U.S. and China has officially begun, at least the first shots fired. Today, the Trump administration slapped $34 billion in tariffs on Chinese goods, with China immediately retaliating with tariffs of its own, targeting not just the U.S., but areas where Trump got the most support. But is President Trump actually winning this war already? There are signs of an increasingly weak Chinese economy. Meanwhile, the U.S. Labor Department reported another strong month for American jobs and the economy in June. Joining us now with more is Tori Whitting of the Heritage Foundation, along with Eric Beach, co-chair of the pro-Trump Great America PAC. Thank you both for joining us this evening. Tori, so let me start with you. You're not a fan of this tariff strategy, but the administration would say, listen, we're fair traders and free traders, and the path to fair trade and free trade is staring down China and others who have had a slanted playing field. And if you don't follow through at the beginning, you're not going to get anything to change.
Well, thanks so much for having me on tonight, Pete. I think that one of the biggest things here that we need to talk about is the great policies from the Trump administration that are actually developing and leading us in this area. We're having great jobs numbers coming out this week. And on top of that, good economic growth for 2 quarters last year. We saw growth above 3% for 2 quarters last year. I think these are coming from policies like tax reform and regulatory reform that are actually straight out of the Heritage Foundation's economic growth playbook.
But I know trade
now,
is not out of your
playbook now. Well, what's in our playbook right now, Pete, are all these great trade policies the Heritage Foundation has been promoting for several years. And we have found that our economic policies work for growth. And we've seen that already, and we want to see them do even more with our policies.
So, Tori, Eric, she laid out why the economic policies domestically have been successful. Yet I feel like you and others would argue that the slanted playing field in the long term is going to hurt us, especially against China, who says it wants to expand and it wants to eventually overtake America.
Not just China, Pete, but I mean, there's an $800 billion goods trade deficit, between U.S. and the entire world. So, at some point we have to level the playing field. And I think what President Trump represents, what he did in the campaign and what he's following through with as president, is that he represents the American worker. I mean, the idea that we have this tax deficit that goes over, this tax money that comes from the workers that goes over, and this big deficit with these other countries, $400 billion with China, is just irresponsible. I think the president knows exactly what he's doing, and he's speaking right to middle America.
Tori, would you acknowledge that if it's not fair trade, then it's truly not free? If we're living in a world where our to put it simply, our stuff's getting taxed on the way in, and their stuff's not getting taxed on the way into our country, ultimately that's not something we should have to put up with?
Well, first of all, I'm going to throw out there that it's actually fundamentally untrue that the United States does not tax imports. We have, plenty of imports taxes.
It's imbalanced.
We have
the point
several,
is that it's
and we also have very high subsidies for a lot of agricultural products. Now, what I do want to correct here is on the issue of the trade deficit. The trade deficit does not matter. It is not a budget deficit like we have over in Congress that they can't do anything about.
It matters to the American workers.
It does not matter for the American workers. And let me tell you about this. I travel all around this country talking about the benefits of trade. I was actually just in Minnesota a couple weeks ago, and farmers in Minnesota are so worried about the president's trade policies because guess who is getting attacked by China right now as a result of these trade policies? Our farmers.
But the president would make the point, Eric, to you, the president would make the point that we've already been attacked, industry after industry, by countries taking advantage of our intellectual property, of our open markets. And yes, now they're counterattacking us on agriculture. But we need to follow through and steer them down for this standoff to actually work.
Pete, the president said it clear. The reason why we don't have a fair, level trade is because no one's ever asked. And the president is asking. He's asking the other countries to say, look, let's level the playing field. It reminds me a lot of the Paris Accord. Let's not burden all Americans.
Listen, the president is not asking for this to happen. The president is saying, I'm going to tax the American people to try and make China change its behavior.
But what's the response? I mean, we keep hearing from, some Republicans and many Democrats that the response is going to be catastrophic. The Dow's up 100 points today. There's 213 jobs in June.
Listen, we're not talking about the impacts in the market. Yes, watching the market is important, but when I travel around to Middle America, Eric, I see that this is hurting people. When I hear from
you're going to see entire industries that are gone because they've been offshored.
Manufacturers in the state of Michigan
you see entire industries that have been offshored,
laying off their workers right now because of high steel prices.
Of course, but entire towns that are gone because industries have gone overseas.
And we're going to see more of that with these bad trade policies.
Okay, I guess if we just continue with what's been going on, I guess we're going to get the same result.
All pro-growth. We're having great pro-growth coming from this fantastic playbook, and I'm not here to say the administration is doing a bad job on economic growth. Tax policy, regulatory policy, fantastic, A+.
Yep.
But when you have to have the whole entire playbook to have sustainable 3% or
Tori,
higher
that's where I feel like what President Trump is talking about is the whole entire playbook. It's let's cut taxes, let's cut regulations, and then let's stare down our geopolitical opponents who've been taking advantage of us for a generation. Eric, last word.
Let's sit down at the table with them.
Pete, this is something that
it's your playbook. It doesn't mean it has to be the playbook. Go ahead, Eric.
No, look. As Donald Trump has said 20 years ago, this is part of his political core. He has been talking about tariffs for a very long time. Don't forget, we've had tariffs between 1787 and 1914. It was a way to fund our federal government.
That's before we had an income tax.
But I understand, right? So we segued into the federal income tax, which also should be revamped. So
let's get rid of the income tax.
The idea that Donald Trump has is to make sure that we let our allies and everybody know around the world that we're not going to be taken advantage of. He's for the American worker, and that's what these tariffs are going to do. And we've seen the response in the short term.
We will end where you started, Tori. I mean, ultimately, this month, job numbers up 213,000. Previous month revised up. Wages are up. These are all good signs that something is being done that's working. Thank you both for your time this evening.
Thanks,
we appreciate it. Thank you, guys. Well, will Secretary of State Mike Pompeo hold Kim Jong-un's feet to the fire and get North Korea to ditch their nukes? New details on the make or break. That's really what it is. These negotiations that are underway right now, coming up next. North Korea takes on the world, along with David Tafuri, a former department official during the Obama administration. Thank you both for being here. Gordon, I'll start with you. You say they've got one shot, which the president has said. What has to happen on this trip for the Secretary of State?
I think the Secretary of State needs to come back with a written commitment from Kim saying, look, giving up nukes, giving up missiles, going to dismantle the weapons infrastructure, and agree to the most intrusive inspections regime on Earth. We need this now because we've seen all these reports, not only the ones about the submarines, but also the increased production of fissile material, working on their plutonium reactor, which has no peaceful purposes, all the rest of it. So we need to know where Kim stands.
David, you know, the last deal we struck, the Iran deal, left a bad taste in a lot of our mouths. What can be done here to avoid the pitfalls, in my opinion, of that deal?
Well, you know, Pete, I agree with Gordon. Pompeo has the hard work now of ironing out the details of the agreement and the summit to denuclearize. That means he has to have a list of things that North Korea is going to do to denuclearize. And those have to be things that we can prove are happening. Otherwise, President Trump and Pompeo cannot say that this is a success. I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic, but it means getting Kim Jong-un to really lock down on certain things he's going to do and then having him do those things.
Yes, Gordon, David raises a good point. They got to do it. What happens if, because we've seen these reports in the news media, they're still developing this, they're still doing that. What if we sign a great deal, Pompeo leaves, and then North Korea 2-3 weeks from now, it's clear that they're cheating? What do we do next?
I think that we go back to the maximum pressure campaign, which is way Kim got to the bargaining table in the first place. So, for instance, that means tightening sanctions on North Korea, but more important, going after North Korea's major power sponsors, the Russians and the Chinese.
Is China being helpful right now?
No. And President Trump actually intimated that when he said that after that second summit between Kim and Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, that the North Korean attitude became much more difficult. You know, China has been busting sanctions, been very open about it. Chinese banks have continued to launder money for the North Koreans, and we have not imposed the costs on Beijing, and we got to do that.
Absolutely. David, from the view of someone who worked for the Obama administration, do you feel like having folks that North Korea is worried about, whether it's John Bolton or Mike Pompeo, does that help at the table for them to realize if they don't do it, they might see even more than maximum pressure?
You know, I worked on the Obama campaign. I'm not sure if that helps or not. That may have gotten us to this point, especially some of the rhetoric by Trump and Pompeo's real shuttle diplomacy, which has been really effective. But right now, the only thing that's going to result in actual progress is having North Korea actually demonstrate that it's pulling out of certain things. Now, we heard news this week that there's satellite imagery showing that North Korea is still using some of the nuclear sites. It's still actively using them. That's a bad sign, like the submarine example that you gave as well. So this is the hard work that Pompeo has to do.
Absolutely. One of the things David just referred to is South Korean lawmakers said that it looks like they're developing a new submarine capable of launching nuclear-armed ballistic missiles. Is that a hedge in case this doesn't work, Gordon, or is this a thumbing of the nose?
Well, I think it's a thumbing of the nose. The North Koreans have been working on missiles launched from submarines for a very long time. They actually launched a missile from under the surface of the Sea of Japan, August 24th, 2016. They have Russian technology to do this. So this has been a long-term project of theirs. I think they're just accelerating what they've done before.
David, I appreciate your fair-mindedness on this as someone who's had to be defensive about certain things. As you look at the prospects of this deal, because we all want it to work, is it an over 50% chance that it happens, or are you pessimistic?
I think it's a 50% chance that this is going to move forward in a productive way. But I think it's real high stakes for the Trump administration because this is now their #1 foreign policy objective, and they don't have much else to show on the foreign policy front other than North Korea, which could be fantastic if North Korea really does take legitimate, identifiable steps to denuclearize. 50%.
Well, and if the flip side is war or the threat of war, you certainly don't want that side either. Appreciate you both. Great insights this evening. All right, well, the infamous Red Hen restaurant changing gears a bit that tossed out Sarah Huckabee Sanders, well, it reopened. And it's sending a loud signal to anyone that may discriminate against Trump supporters. We're going to explain that next.